Samuel Carter, a 92-year-old Korean War veteran, had lived in his modest home in the quiet suburb of Maplewood for over 6 decades. The house, though weathered by time, stood as a testament to his life's work and memories. It was where he had raised his 3 children, buried his beloved wife, and spent countless evenings on the porch, watching the world go by. But on a crisp Monday morning, as the sun cast long shadows across his front yard, Samuel received a letter that would change everything. The envelope, crisp and official-looking, bore the return address of the Maplewood Homeowners Association, HOA. Samuel frowned as he opened it, his gnarled fingers trembling slightly. The letter inside was a violation notice, citing a series of alleged infractions: an overgrown lawn, chipped paint on the fence, and a rusted mailbox that no longer met the HOA's aesthetic standards. Samuel's jaw tightened as he read the ultimatum: 30 days to correct the violations or face escalating fines, and, ultimately, EVY-time. His heart pounded in his chest. This house was more than just a structure. It was his sanctuary, his last connection to a life filled with love, loss, and resilience. The Maplewood HOA, led by its ambitious president, Richard Grayson, had grown increasingly authoritarian over the years. What had once been a well-meaning organization aimed at maintaining the neighborhood's charm had morphed into a power-hungry entity, using fines and intimidation to control homeowners. Richard, a slick businessman in his early 50s, saw the HOA as a stepping stone to greater political ambitions. He had no qualms about using his position to crush anyone who stood in his way. When Samuel failed to comply with the violation notice, the fines began to pile up. Richard, confident in his ability to outmaneuver an elderly man, escalated the matter. He filed a lien against Samuel's property, effectively putting the house at risk of foreclosure. Samuel, however, was not a man to back down. He had survived the horrors of war, and he wasn't about to let a group of bureaucrats take his home. Samuel's grandson, Ethan Carter, was a 34-year-old Marine Corps captain stationed overseas. When he received a frantic call from his grandfather, Ethan was stunned. The idea that a decorated war veteran could be forced out of his home over petty violations was unthinkable. Ethan immediately took leave and flew back to Maplewood, determined to fight for his grandfather. Ethan's first move was to contact the media. He knew that public outrage could be a powerful weapon. Within hours, local news outlets were running stories about the 92-year-old veteran facing EVY-time. The narrative quickly gained traction, and soon, national media picked up the story. The headlines were brutal. Decorated war hero faces EVY-time over HOA fines, and power-hungry HOA targets elderly veteran. Ethan didn't stop with the media. He reached out to veterans organizations, military nonprofits, and advocacy groups. Samuel's CRVYC record spoke for itself: a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and a lifetime of sacrifice for his country. The response was overwhelming. Emails flooded in, petitions circulated, and calls for action echoed across the nation. But Ethan knew that to truly turn the tide, they needed more than public support. He made a call to a high-ranking official at the Pentagon, laying out the situation in stark terms. The official listened intently, and by the end of the call, Ethan knew that the wheels of justice were beginning to turn. The national outcry was swift and unrelenting. Richard Grayson, once a confident and untouchable figure, found himself at the center of a media firestorm. Reporters camped outside his office, demanding answers. The mayor and governor issued statements condemning the HOA's actions, and calls for an investigation grew louder. The HOA's board members began to resign, one by one, as the pressure mounted. Sponsors and business partners pulled their support, and the organization's once sterling reputation crumbled. Richard, desperate to save face, tried to distance himself from the controversy, but it was too late. The EVY-denke of the HOA's corruption was overwhelming. With the help of a top-tier legal team pro-VY dead by the Pentagon, Samuel and Ethan filed a lawsuit against the HOA. The case was a bombshell, exposing years of fraudulent fines, forced foreclosures, and shady dealings. Emails and financial records revealed a calculated scheme to enrich the HOA at the expense of homeowners. The courtroom battle was intense. Richard Grayson, now a shadow of his former self, sat slumped in his chair as the EVY Denke against him was laid bare. His lawyer tried every trick in the book, but the tide had turned. The judge, V.Y. Sibley, moved by Samuel's testimony, ruled in his favor, awarding him $2.5 million in damages and nullifying the EVY tie-in notice. The verdict was a VY Tory not just for Samuel, but for every homeowner who had been VY Timized by the HOA. The organization was dissolved, its assets seized, and its members faced criminal charges. Richard Grayson, once a powerful figure, was now a pariah, his career and reputation in ruins. Samuel, standing tall despite his age, addressed the crowd gathered outside his home. "I didn't fight for money," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "I fought for justice. For every American who has been pushed down by a corrupt system. Today we prove that justice still exists." The crowd erupted in applause, tears streaming down many faces. Samuel's story had become a symbol of resilience and the enduring fight for what is right. In the months that followed, Samuel's home became a gathering place for veterans, neighbors, and active VYSTS. The front yard, once deemed unacceptable by the HOA, was now filled with American flags and folding chairs as people came to honor the man who had stood his ground. Samuel, ever the humble hero, donated the entirety of his settlement to veterans support organizations. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about the men and women who serve this country, the ones who don't have a voice. They deserve better." As the sun set over Maplewood, casting a warm golden light over Samuel's home, it was clear that this was more than just a VY Tory. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, no matter the odds. And as for Richard Grayson, he vanished from public life, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. History, as Samuel had proven, remembers those who fight for justice, not those who build their empires on greed. Samuel Carter's VY Tory reverberated far beyond Maplewood. His story became a rallying cry for homeowners across the nation who had been bullied by overzealous HOAs. News outlets continued to cover the fallout, and social media was ablaze with hashtags like the Justice for Samuel and the HOA Reform. Politicians, sensing the public's outrage, began drafting legislation to curb the power of HOAs and protect homeowners from abusive practices. In Washington, D.C., a bipartisan group of senators introduced the Homeowners Bill of Rights, a sweeping piece of legislation aimed at reforming HOA governance. The bill included pro-VY signs to limit fines, increase transparency, and establish an independent oversight committee to investigate complaints. Samuel's case was cited repeatedly during the debates, with lawmakers holding him up as an example of why such reforms were necessary. Ethan, now back on active duty, kept in close contact with his grandfather. He was proud of what they had accomplished together, but he also knew that the fight was far from over. "This is just the beginning, Grandpa," he said during one of their weekly VY Deo calls. "Your story has sparked a movement. People are waking up." Samuel, sitting in his favorite armchair with a cup of tea, nodded thoughtfully. "I never set out to be a symbol, Ethan. I just wanted to keep my home. But if this helps others, then it's worth it." As the federal investigation into the Maplewood HOA continued, more shocking details emerged. It turned out that Richard Grayson and his cronies had been running a sophisticated scheme for years, targeting vulnerable homeowners and using the HOA as a front for their illegal active VY ties. They had colluded with local contractors, real estate agents, and even a few corrupt officials to inflate fines, force foreclosures, and flip properties for profit. The Department of Justice, working with the FBI and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, uncovered a web of deceit that extended far beyond Maplewood. Similar scams were happening in other neighborhoods across the country, all under the guise of maintaining community standards. The investigation led to dozens of arrests, including several high-profile figures who had once seemed untouchable. Richard Grayson, now facing multiple felony charges, tried to cut a deal by cooperating with prosecutors. But his testimony only added to the mountain of EVY Denke against him. In the end, he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, a far cry from the life of luxury he had once enjoyed. With the old HOA dissolved, the residents of Maplewood came together to form a new, more democratic homeowners association. Samuel, though initially reluctant to get involved, was persuaded to join the board as an honorary member. His presence served as a reminder of what could happen when power went unchecked. The new HOA focused on transparency and community engagement. Meetings were open to all residents, and decisions were made by majority vote rather than by a small group of elites. Fines were capped, and homeowners were given more time to address violations. The emphasis shifted from enforcing arbitrary aesthetic standards to fostering a sense of community and mutual respect. Samuel's home, once a symbol of conflict, became a gathering place for neighborhood events. The front yard, now meticulously maintained by volunteers, hosted barbecues, block parties, and even a small Veterans Day ceremony. Samuel, though still a private man, found himself enjoying the camaraderie. It was a far cry from the isolation he had felt during his battle with the old HOA. As the months turned into years, Samuel's story continued to inspire. He was in WWII to speak at veterans events, schools, and even a few congressional hearings. His message was always the same: stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And never forget the people who fought for this country. Ethan, now a major in the Marine Corps, often joined his grandfather at these events. The two of them made a powerful team, their bond strengthened by the battles they had fought together. Ethan's wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Emily, also became part of the story, representing the next generation of Americans who would carry on Samuel's legacy. In one particularly moving speech, Samuel addressed a group of high school students. "You don't have to be a soldier to fight for justice," he said. "You just have to care. Care about your neighbors, your community, your country. That's what makes a hero." In the winter of his 95th year, Samuel's health began to decline. He had lived a long, full life, but the years were finally catching up to him. Ethan, now stationed closer to home, spent as much time as he could with his grandfather. They would sit on the porch, just as they had during the darkest days of the HOA battle, and talk about everything from military strategy to Emily's latest soccer game. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel turned to Ethan with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said. "When I'm gone, I want this house to be a place where veterans can come and find peace. A sanctuary, like it was for me." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "We'll make it happen, Grandpa. I promise." True to his word, Ethan worked with local veterans organizations to establish the Samuel Carter Veterans Retreat, a nonprofit dedicated to providing housing and support for veterans in need. The house, with its rich history and warm, welcoming atmosphere, became a beacon of hope for those who had served their country. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool spring morning. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, from neighbors and friends to veterans and active VYSTS. The eulogies were filled with stories of his courage, his kindness, and his unwavering commitment to justice. Ethan, standing at the podium, struggled to hold back tears as he spoke. "My grandfather taught me that the true measure of a person isn't in the battles they win, but in the lives they touch. He touched so many lives, and his legacy will live on in all of us." As the crowd dispersed, Ethan lingered by his grandfather's grave, a single American flag fluttering in the breeze. He placed a hand on the headstone and whispered, "I'll keep fighting, Grandpa. For you, for Emily, for everyone who believes in what's right." In the years that followed, the Samuel Carter Veterans Retreat became a thriving community, helping hundreds of veterans rebuild their lives. The house, now a symbol of resilience and hope, stood as a testament to one man's courage and the power of standing up for what is right. Ethan, now a colonel, continued to serve in the Marine Corps while also overseeing the retreat. He often brought Emily with him, teaching her the values that Samuel had instilled in him. "This is where it all began," he told her one day as they stood in the front yard. "This is where your great-grandfather proved that one person can make a difference." Emily, now a teenager, looked up at her father with determination in her eyes. "I want to make a difference too," she said. Ethan smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You already are, kiddo. You already are." Emily Carter, now in her early 20s, had grown up steeped in her great-grandfather's legacy. She had spent countless hours at the Samuel Carter Veterans Retreat, listening to the stories of veterans and helping out wherever she could. Her father, Ethan, had always encouraged her to find her own path, but it was clear that the fight for justice ran deep in her blood. After graduating from college with a degree in political science, Emily decided to take a bold step. She announced her candidacy for the Maplewood City Council, running on a platform of transparency, accountability, and community empowerment. Her campaign slogan, "Standing Up for What's Right," was a direct nod to her great-grandfather's legacy. The campaign was not without its challenges. Emily faced opposition from entrenched politicians who saw her as an idealistic newcomer. But she had learned from her father and great-grandfather that the fight for justice was never easy. She poured her heart into the campaign, holding town halls, knocking on doors, and listening to the concerns of her neighbors. On election night, as the results came in, Emily stood on the stage at her campaign headquarters, surrounded by family, friends, and supporters. When the final tally was announced, the room erupted in cheers. Emily had won by a landslide, becoming the youngest person ever elected to the Maplewood City Council. Emily's victory was a triumph, but it also brought new challenges. Shortly after taking office, she began to hear whispers of corruption within the city government. Contracts were being awarded to favored companies, zoning laws were being manipulated, and there were rumors of kickbacks and bribes. Determined to root out the corruption, Emily launched an investigation. She worked closely with local journalists, activists, and law enforcement to gather evidence. But as she dug deeper, she began to receive threats. Anonymous letters warned her to back off, and her car was vandalized one night. Ethan, now a retired Marine colonel, urged his daughter to be careful. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest, Emily," he said. "These people play dirty." Emily, however, was undeterred. "I'm not backing down, Dad," she replied. "Grandpa didn't, and neither will I." The breakthrough in Emily's investigation came when a whistleblower stepped forward. Mark Reynolds, a mid-level bureaucrat in the city's planning department, had grown disillusioned with the corruption he saw around him. He reached out to Emily, offering to provide evidence in exchange for protection. Mark's testimony was explosive. He revealed a web of corruption that reached the highest levels of city government, including the mayor's office. Contracts were being awarded to companies with ties to organized crime, and millions of dollars were being siphoned off into offshore accounts. Emily knew that exposing this corruption would be risky, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. She worked with federal investigators to build a case, ensuring that the evidence was airtight. When the time came, she held a press conference, laying out the findings of her investigation in stark detail. The fallout was immediate. The mayor resigned in disgrace, and several high-ranking officials were arrested. Emily's courage and determination made her a hero in the eyes of many, but it also made her a target. One evening, as Emily was leading a community meeting, a car pulled up beside her. Before she could react, a masked man jumped out and lunged at her with a knife. Emily, trained in self-defense by her father, managed to fight him off, but not before sustaining a deep cut to her arm. The attack sent shockwaves through the community. Ethan, furious and terrified for his daughter's safety, insisted on hiring a security detail. But Emily refused to be intimidated. "If they think this will stop me, they're wrong," she said. "I'm not going to let fear dictate my life." The attack only strengthened Emily's resolve. She doubled down on her efforts to clean up the city government, pushing through reforms that increased transparency and accountability. Her bravery inspired others to come forward, and the investigation continued to uncover more corruption. Emily's fight against corruption in Maplewood caught the attention of national media. Her story was featured on major news networks, and she was invited to speak at conferences and rallies across the country. She became a symbol of a new generation of leaders who were unafraid to take on the establishment. Her message resonated with young people who were tired of the status quo and hungry for change. Emily's speeches, filled with passion and conviction, inspired a wave of activism. She encouraged her peers to run for office, to get involved in their communities, and to fight for what they believed in. "We don't have to accept the world as it is," she said in one particularly powerful speech. "We have the power to change it. But it starts with us. It starts with standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." As Emily's influence grew, so did her ambitions. She decided to run for Congress, aiming to bring her fight for justice to the national stage. Her campaign was a grassroots movement, fueled by the energy and enthusiasm of young people who believed in her vision. On election night, as the results came in, Emily stood on the stage at her campaign headquarters, just as she had years earlier when she won her seat on the city council. When the final tally was announced, the room erupted in cheers once again. Emily had won, becoming the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. Her Tory was a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring legacy of her great-grandfather. Samuel Carter's fight for justice had inspired a movement that was now changing the face of American politics. In Congress, Emily faced new challenges. She was now dealing with powerful lobbyists, entrenched politicians, and a system that was resistant to change. But she remained steadfast in her commitment to justice. She introduced legislation to combat corruption, protect veterans, and empower communities. Her work was not without opposition. She faced smear campaigns, death threats, and relentless attacks from those who felt threatened by her rise. But Emily, drawing on the strength of her great-grandfather's legacy, refused to back down. One of her proudest achievements was the passage of the Samuel Carter Anti-Corruption Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that increased transparency in government and cracked down on unethical practices. The act was a fitting tribute to her great-grandfather, a man who had fought for justice until his last breath. As Emily stood on the steps of the Capitol, watching the sun rise over Washington, D.C., she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come a long way from the young girl who had listened to her great-grandfather's stories on the porch of his home. But she knew that her work was far from over. The fight for justice was a never-ending battle, one that required constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. But Emily was ready. She had been raised by a family of fighters, and she knew that she had the strength to carry on the legacy. As she turned to walk back into the Capitol, she whispered a silent promise to her great-grandfather. "I'll keep fighting, Grandpa. For you, for Dad, for everyone who believes in what's right." Samuel Carter's legacy continued to inspire generations long after his passing. The Samuel Carter Veterans Retreat remained a sanctuary for those who had served their country, and his story was taught in schools as an example of courage and resilience. Emily Carter, now a prominent figure in American politics, carried on the fight for justice with the same determination and passion that had defined her great-grandfather's life. She knew that the battle was never truly over, but she also knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, there was hope. And as the sun set over Maplewood, casting its golden light on the Samuel Carter Veterans Retreat, it was clear that his legacy would live on, a beacon of hope and justice for all. Emily Carter's rise in Congress was meteoric, but it came with a price. The more she pushed for reform, the more she became a target for those who benefited from the status quo. Lobbyists, corporate interests, and even some within her own party began to see her as a threat. Despite the mounting pressure, Emily remained steadfast, driven by the lessons of her great-grandfather, Samuel Carter, and the unwavering support of her father, Ethan. One evening, as Emily was preparing for a crucial vote on campaign finance reform, she received an anonymous tip. A whistleblower within a powerful lobbying firm claimed to have evidence of a massive bribery scheme involving several high-ranking members of Congress. The stakes were higher than ever, and Emily knew that exposing this corruption could change the course of American politics, but it could also put her life in danger. The whistleblower, a young intern named Claire Bennett, met Emily in a dimly lit parking garage late at night. Claire handed over a USB drive containing thousands of emails, financial records, and audio recordings. The evidence was damning, implicating not only members of Congress, but also influential CEOs and foreign entities. "This is bigger than I thought," Emily said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "If this gets out, it could bring down the entire system." Claire nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I know the risks, but someone has to do something. I couldn't just stand by and watch." Emily placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. "You're brave, but you need to disappear for a while. Let me handle this." Emily knew she had to act quickly. She reached out to a trusted journalist, Sarah Mitchell, who had covered her grandfather's battle with the HOA years earlier. Together, they meticulously reviewed the evidence, ensuring its authenticity. When they were confident in their findings, Sarah published an explosive exposé that sent shockwaves through the nation. The headlines were relentless: Congress in crisis, bribery scandal rocks Capitol Hill, and Emily Carter exposes corruption at the highest levels. The public outcry was immediate. Protests erupted in cities across the country, demanding accountability and reform. But the backlash was swift. Emily's office was flooded with threats, and her security detail had to be doubled. Ethan, now retired and WWII in Maplewood, urged his daughter to come home, but Emily refused. "This is what Grandpa would have done," she said. "I can't back down now." The scandal led to a series of high-profile resignations and arrests. Several members of Congress, including some of Emily's colleagues, were indicted on charges of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. The public's trust in government was shattered, but Emily's courage in exposing the corruption earned her widespread admiration. However, the fight was far from over. The powerful figures who had been exposed were not going down without a fight. They launched a smear campaign against Emily, accusing her of fabricating the EVY Denke and using the scandal to further her own political career. The attacks were relentless, but Emily stood her ground, knowing that the truth was on her side. One night, as Emily was WWII a late-night session in Congress, her security team intercepted a suspicious package outside her office. Inside was a bomb, rigged to detonate when opened. The FBI traced the WWII to a known associate of one of the indicted CEOs, confirming Emily's worst fears. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The attempted assassination was a turning point. The public, already outraged by the scandal, rallied behind Emily. Even her political opponents were forced to condemn the attack, and calls for a full investigation into the corruption grew louder. Ethan, furious and terrified for his daughter's safety, flew to Washington to be by her side. "You've done enough, Emily," he said. "Let someone else take it from here." But Emily shook her head. "I can't stop now, Dad. This is what Grandpa fought for. This is what we've always fought for." With the nation watching, Emily introduced the Clean Government Act, a sweeping piece of legislation aimed at rooting out corruption and increasing transparency in government. The bill included pro-VY science for stricter campaign finance laws, term limits for Congress, and an independent oversight committee to investigate unethical practices. The battle to pass the bill was grueling. Emily faced fierce opposition from those who stood to lose the most, but she refused to back down. She worked tirelessly, rallying support from both sides of the aisle and appealing directly to the American people. Finally, after months of debate and negotiation, the Clean Government Act passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It was a historic moment, a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring legacy of Samuel Carter. Emily stood on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by her family, colleagues, and supporters, as President signed the Clean Government Act into law. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had honored her great-grandfather's legacy and proven that one person could make a difference. But she knew that the fight for justice was never truly over. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. "This is just the beginning," she said in her speech. "We have a long way to go, but together, we can build a better future." Years later, Emily Carter's name was etched into the history books alongside her great-grandfather's. The Samuel Carter Veterans Retreat continued to thrive, and the Clean Government Act became a cornerstone of American democracy. Emily, now a seasoned leader, remained committed to the fight for justice, inspiring a new generation of active VYSTS and leaders. As she stood on the porch of her great-grandfather's home in Maplewood, watching the sun set over the horizon, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. The battles had been hard-fought, but the VY Tories had been worth it. Samuel Carter's legacy lived on, not just in the laws and institutions he had helped shape, but in the hearts and minds of those who believed in the power of standing up for what's right. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Emily whispered a silent promise to her great-grandfather. "We'll keep fighting, Grandpa. For you, for Dad, for everyone who believes in what's right." If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.